George and Pansy Porteous, who has influenced thousands of young people from rural Jamaica to be better people. I have also called, I was on hall with. I suspect we have 3 persons now in the house who hail from Butchers. Butchers. Taylor Hall. A particular block on Taylor Hall now has 3 senators in, and Senator Crawford, who, oh yes, Senator Crawford, who we spent a long time at UA together advocating on behalf of students. One day I'll speak of the story. The story of the tear gas canisters at the Queen's Gate. We'll save that for another time. But my commitment here today is to contribute as much as I can to the development of my country. I have a lot to be thankful for. I think Jamaica has done well for me, provided me with an education, kept me safe, given me the opportunity to contribute at such a young age to the development of Jamaica and its people. And I think I have a responsibility for people who are in Woodall, for other persons like myself, to not only be an example, but to also demonstrate that with hard work you can achieve. So my commitment to not only the Senate to demonstrate enforces the view that we are stronger together than we are apart. So again, I want to thank everyone who has welcomed me so warmly. President, leader as well. Thank you very much for welcoming me. Thank you.
Over the last week, Jamaica celebrated 2 significant days which the country sought to recognize particular groupings. We celebrated the start of Child's Month, and we had Teachers' Day. I think one day this week was celebrated as Teachers' Day, Wednesday. And as we have so many promising young Jamaicans here today, not going to call them children, but several promising young Jamaicans, young adults really, here today, it's significant that we recognize Child's Month. And of course, we have teachers here from, I think 4 teachers from St. Mary's High. The teachers are, could you just indicate? Yeah, there are the teachers who have accompanied these kids all the way from St. Mary. No, Senator Crawford. The teachers from St. Mary I'm recognizing. So it's a very to our teachers here today. Very special welcome to you. And I'm going to entertain 2 brief interventions with respect to Teachers' Day and Child Month. Senator Longmore.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Morgan, welcome. We're much appreciated that you're here. And I know you will be making very significant contributions to this House and to Jamaica. Mr. President, I rise in recognition of this celebrated here in Jamaica as National Child Month. And the National Child Month Committee this year actually has been focusing on children with disability and observing under the theme, Encourage, Enable, and Include Me. Several activities were undertaken during this month, and there's partnership with a number of child-related agencies to recognize our children and ensure that they feel the love that Jamaica has. One of such highlights will be actually next Friday on the 17th being observed as National Children's Day, and we are encouraging persons to wear sunshine yellow in observance of that day. Now, Mr. President, in addition to this year being focused on children with disabilities, it is even greater effort by the government to focus on our children's welfare that Labor Day 2019 is declared child safety. It's up to you, it's up to me, it's up to all of we. And this was declared such on Tuesday the 7th of May by our Honorable Prime Minister Andrew Michael Holness. And what we are trying to see is that the Labor Day projects and National Workers Week 2019 is focused on the safety and security of our children. The stark irony, as we fine-tune this focus on our children, is that the reality is that a lot of them face a lot of abuse, a lot of very negative influences in our society. I would take this occasion to remind us that here in Jamaica, the definition of a child is anyone below 18. And we kind of get confused with the age of consent being at 16, but we have to bear this in mind as it relates especially to the sexual crimes that are happening against our children. The blaring brutality of some of our young. 14 have been murdered since the start of this year. 83 raped, 49 victims of grievous sexual assault, and 1 has actually committed suicide since the start of the year. Statistics from the CDA shows that on average, 10 out of every 1,000 child is subject to child abuse or maltreatment. 79% of children witness violence in their communities or home. 79%. 68 out of every 100,000 children are victims of a violent crime. I am sure we will all recall 14-year-old Yatanya Francis in Arnold Gardens last year, in August last year, who was just sent out to buy some food in her community and was later found, I think 2 days later, in an open lot. Her killers allegedly raped, chopped, and burnt her 14-year-old body. Mr. President, it may be time for us to start a real conversation about sex abuse crimes, especially amongst our children, with full recognition that there are predators in our society, pedophilic, sociopathic, human traffickers who are targeting our children for sex trade and prostitution. Some of them within their own families, unfortunately. And Mr. President, Sunday coming is mothers. I can only imagine the hearts of the mothers of 8-year-old Shanae Skyers from Stirling Castle in St. Andrew, and 11-year-old Trisha Morris from Pond in Hanover, who met a same brutal fate. And it's not just our girls. Just earlier this week, we saw where 15-year-old Cleon Morgan, was allegedly murdered by 3 men in Seaview Gardens 2 days ago. Mr. President, the 11-year-old Secret Gardens monument at the corner of Tower and Church Streets in downtown Kingston is running out of space. I think it has run out of space, Mr. Mayor, to add the names, to commemorate the memory of those children that we have lost in violent ways. And I just want to add that the case in Stirling of Shantae's death was also a double sad situation, because a man who was mentally ill was actually attacked and murdered by the community in revenge for Shantae's death. 2 wrongs don't make a right. We in the upper house here play a role, as we do in every other aspect of government in this country, but to protect our children. We are pursuing legislation, the 2017 amendment to the Children Guardianship and Custody Act. In 2018, we have seen the convening of the Joint Select Committee for Sexual Offenses, Child Care and Protection, and the Domestic Violence Acts to review those. And we are here in 2018 seeing the Child Diversion Act also being recognized. We also recognize the importance of children as we pursue the Joint Select Committee on Occupational and Safety Health. All of these relate to our children, and in this month, we must be reminded of all of these issues as it relates to our young. Another focus of this administration, Mr. President, is the road safety of our children. Statistics assert that over 120 children have died on our roads in the past 5 years, and another significant number suffer from life-changing injuries as a result of over 70,000 traffic accidents within 100 meters of school zones in the past 10 years. And so it is the focus of the Labor Day projects, child safety, it is you, it is me, it is all of we, that the National Labor Day program is seeking to mobilize every Jamaican to spend at least a part of the day targeting road safety for our children. Provision of signage, installation of crosswalks, directional murals, rumble strips, which are the slowing down rumble strips, installation of buys and bus lanes for taxis near schools, etc. Mr. President, we are also hoping to focus on the food security of our children as we assert to ensure the preparation of nutritional lunches and establishing school and backyard gardens within some of these schools as part of the Labor Day projects and recreational spaces within our schools. And Mr. President, here I have to recognize our teachers, and we celebrated Teachers' Day on Wednesday, and it is the teachers who mold our future. Not everyone can become a teacher. It takes a special purpose, a special passion, and a special effort at different stages, and we appreciate and we thank you for your service. Mr. President, as we recognize Child Month, let us recognize also that it is the 30th anniversary of the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Children, created in 1989. And so as a country, we recognize the need to ensure in every action, this must even be taken to the extent where we judge our progress by the extent to which we are able to demonstrate our commitment to the well-being of our children. As we celebrate this month, I implore those who have information about the predators who target our children to make the call to Crime Stop. Contact the police. It is safe and it is secure. Let us make an effort to save our children. And please remember, Friday next week, sunshine yellow, to show our children our love. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that tour de force, Senator Longworth. Senator Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to start by welcoming as well, firstly, the students from St. Mary, that I am a part-time resident. My farm is in St. Mary.
Entrepreneur.
My chicken farm, soon to be goat farm. Yes. And I want to, so far.
Expansion.
But I would like to invite the students one day to come and see the farm, so that one day they may be encouraged. Well, they're all on the same farm. All on the same farm. I also want to welcome Senator. I won't tell them what your name used to be. Yeah, you know. We know. But when a parent names someone after Bob Marley, that parent had hope and expectation. And I personally proud to hear your name, because you have evolved from what we knew as a shy guy on campus.
Shy?
Initially. But what I'm seeing now is 10 times improved from what you were. And I mean, we all improve over time. We all learn, we all grow. And sometimes, if you knew was and what I am, and if you knew what he was and what he is now, he wasn't bad, but he's much better. So I'm proud to have known you, sir, as a member of the Midas and a member of Taylor Hall. Growing unified to success.
Yes.
Mr. President, I'll be wearing my yellow next week. But I also must say that in Child's Month, I'm a little bit disappointed in what we're doing for our children. And one of the words in the conversation is encourage. And I would like to encourage the government to do more for our children. It is some issues that we face in health, for example. In December, it was noted that 339 cases of dengue was at the Bustamante Children's Hospital. December 21st, it was also noted that scores have died because of dengue, for which we have majored in the minor with the semantics of proven cases versus suspected cases. It also have highlighted, Mr. President, that 973 children were admitted during November for flu-like symptoms. And further, Richard Dawson stated that the Bustamante Children's Home is in need of more doctors, for which they had 6 unfilled vacancies in the A&E department, accident and emergency. Mr. President, the single children's hospital, Bustamante Children's Hospital, which caters to children 12 years and under, a place for parents to actually stay while their child is being admitted. And so, to that extent, someone coming from out of Portland, St. Thomas, St. Mary, with a child admitted to the children's hospital, will have to travel from St. Mary, Portland, Clarendon, wherever, to go to their child's aid. Now, to the contrary, someone from Kingston could take lunchtime. Someone from St. Mary would have to take the day. And if your child is there, possibly the week. Mr. President, as highlighted by the senator who spoke before me, violence against our children is great. We have had, as she highlighted, many murders since the start of the year. But also, since the start of this year, 153 children have been reported missing and not found. That is more than 1 per day. Now, 1,164 have been reported missing. 1,164. 153 are still missing. That's just for this year. Since 2018 to now, 304 are still missing. And unfortunately, the effort that we put to highlight the roads that are being fixed are not the equal effort that we put to highlight the children that are missing. The effort that we put to highlight the Prime Minister's exercise regime or the meals that he eats are not the same effort that we put to highlight the children that are missing. 340 since January 1, 2018 are still missing. And I cannot find a place to go and see if I know them. I cannot find a central repository to view if the new child living in a home beside me is one of those children. So, Mr. President, because I was a little bit tired of continuing to condemn the murder, kidnapping, rape of our children, but in particular because I see where many Jamaicans want to participate in finding our missing children, myself and my committee have to organize through our SaveOurChildrenJamaica.com for persons who want to volunteer to receive immediate information when children are missing. We are willing to pass this on to the police if they're so willing. Those who are willing to say, I agree to be informed, will be immediately sent information once confirmed by the police and will be told of organized search systems within their areas. We have also commissioned an app, Mr. President, and this app will lead for parents to be sent a text message once their child have deviated from a selected route. Once the child leaves school, home, or any other place en route to a second place, the child will be able to, the phone will indicate a direction and a route. And once there's a diversion from that route, a deviation from that route, or once there's a delay on that route, and the parent can then call the child and have immediate intervention if the child is not heard from. Unfortunately, we have not seen much activity. Ms. Shante Skiles as well, who died, Mr. President, there's a further once you become 18. So he too might have been a victim of our system, as he was a ward of the state until 18. These things, Mr. President, need to be further researched. Mr. President, in Etiquette, we have a great problem, and yet we have no official minister, Mr. President. The Ministry of Education still does not have an official minister of education. And on Child's Month, the Ministry of Youth still does not have an official minister of youth. Now, if this was a minister of finance, this lag would have taken place. If it was a Ministry of National Security, this lag will not have taken place. So we're saying what is the level of priority that we're placing on youth and education. But we have some issues in education that I'm encouraging that henceforth the nation seek to have May be the start of a change and a celebration of that change next May. For example, primary schools. There are many schools, Mr. President, where one classroom has grades, in many cases 3 grades, 1, 2, and 3, with one teacher, suggesting that that child is learning 1 grade work when he should be in 3 grade, or 3 grade work when he should be in 1 grade. But at some point, 2/3 of the children will be learning something not on there. We have multi-grade schools that are preparing our children for failure. The time of exposure to the syllabus they should be exposed to is not available. A primary school have shift system. Port Antonio Primary, Boundbrook Primary. I never knew that these things existed. That's about a campaign. It really exposes us to some of the problems that we have. But a shift system for a primary school means that a 7-year-old is getting herself ready to go to school by 12. Either that is the case or her parent is unemployed. A shift school means that a 12-year-old is being sent home with no supervision until 7, with persons who might be intending to create harm. Schools for primary schools still in Jamaica. And 161 schools, of which only 41 have more than 50% chance of getting 5 subjects. Each May, we should highlight what we are going to target and how we are going to change that. In Child's Month, we still have the Walker Place of Safety that has not received 1 gravel of work. That was in the fire in January of T. In fact, in February 23rd, 2018, a headline in the newspaper, Walker's Place of Safety, work underway to rebuild Walker Place of Safety, February 23rd, 2018. August 17, 2018, it said, Walker's Place of Safety to be rebuilt as a state-of-the-art facility. 25 million has been raised, Mr. President, from the public. I think Usain Bolt also contributed. So to this, not 1 gravel have been laid for Walker's Place of Safety. The children that were said to be traumatized have been removed to other places that were already oversubscribed. We celebrated as a government giving up $14 billion. We could have given up 13 and used $1 billion to improve some of these children's homes. We look as well at transportation for children. Currently, 11 from Edwin Allen was in an accident. 1 taxi that went over into a ditch. 2 of them are critical at this time. And we tried a piecemeal approach of a rural school bus system that I've not heard much about. But Mr. President, and even the private sector in Jamaica, to look at 20% of our funds for those children. Because you have, for example, Happy Grove High School, students coming from St. Mary, 3 hours of from St. Thomas, 3 hours transportation, from Yalas, trying to go to Happy Grove. And this will continue because we have schools with less than 1% chance of getting 5 subjects, students and parents. And to get to Happy Grove, it takes 3.5 hours. A student reported to me, he got up at 3. He got up at 3 a.m. Mr. President, JC has done it. We're calling on the alumni, and we're calling on the business, and we're calling on the government, and we're calling on the citizens. Some of our schools need to facilitate transportation for our students. There's still going to be an issue when 1 car in an exam period have 11 students, 2 critically ill, 2 critically injured, and in hospital speak. Mr. President, I read a report from the Ministry of Health that said that 5% of our kids under 18 have multiple partners, and that there's an increase in HIV in the age bracket to 28. where the researcher found that these people were in the main introduced to sexual activity between 13 and 15. Some case between 10 and 15. Yet, with limited resources, we have focused more on reporting on the health pursuit of the Minister of Health, or drinking soda as the public marketing and social marketing campaign. This is within a context that it was stated by the researcher there is a sparsity of information about HIV, a lull in the campaign against HIV. I end, Mr. President, by reading a simple paragraph from a UNESCO report in 2018. It says, a quarter of Jamaicans children, I quote, live in poverty, and as a result are more likely to be ill, engage in child labor, have reduced access to sanitation facilities, and be exposed to violent discipline. Girls in the poorest population quintile are more likely to become teenage parents. Children enjoy some social protection from the state. Mr. President, of the 40,000 disabled found in our census, only 4,000 by our system. There needs to be, in my opinion, an encouragement to the nation to identify one issue in May and to celebrate the solution to that issue the next May if we are really to be Child's Month. As a teacher myself, I want to say Happy Teachers' Day to all the teachers in Jamaica. And definitely, as I leave later today or tomorrow to go see my own mom, a happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. I thank you, sir. I've given your own mother a wonderful Mother's Day present to become senator from Woodall. Respect and love.
Thank you.
Mr. President, Senator Crawford made one or two points that I need to clarify.
On a point of order, Mr. President. President.
There were some
Mr. President, a point of order. Mr. President,
Senator Brown, let me hear this point of order.
Much latitude have been given to the speakers, and that we're at a point on the agenda which is you have allowed some latitude to recognize the day. I think we have both sides gone well beyond what is allowed, and I don't think we should treat this as a debate. I think we should move on the agenda.
Senator Brown, Senator Longmore, you know you can do it by my leave, but I consider critical.
Yes, it is.
Let me hear. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so there was.
No. Excuse me. Point of order. No.
Clarify errors made in the statements. Factual errors.
I'm going to allow you to speak.
Senator Knight,
Thanks.
I'm going to ask you to just take your seat, please.
Yes.
I'm going to continue with the agenda. I can't get into it. I can't get into it. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Annual report of the National Land Agency for the year 2009 to 2010 from the Ministry of Economic Growth. Annual report of the land divestment for the year 2017-2018 from the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Annual report of the eGov Jamaica Limited for the year 2017-2018 from the Ministry of Science, Energy and Tech. Emergency Powers Continuance Resolution 2019 from the Office of the Prime Minister, and Green Paper No. 2019 from the Ministry of Health and Wellness, entitled the National Health Insurance Plan for Jamaica.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives. petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next Senate I will move the following motion. The Emergency Powers Act, the Emergency Powers Continuance Resolution 2019. Whereas by virtue of Section 20, subsection 1 and 2b of Jamaica, the Governor General may make a proclamation declaring that a state of public emergency exists if satisfied that action has been taken or is immediately threatened by any person or body of persons or persons of and on so extensive a scale as to be likely to endanger the public safety. And whereas the Governor General was satisfied that a state of public emergency existed as a result of the aforementioned circumstances, and whereas on the 30th of April 2019, the Governor General by proclamation, the public emergency exists in the entire area comprising the parishes of St. James, Hanover, and Westmoreland, and further declare that the said proclamation shall, unless previously revoked, remain in force for 14 days or for such long not exceeding 3 months as both Houses of Parliament may determine by a resolution supported by a 2/3 majority of all the members of each House. And whereas it is provided by Section 20, sub 3 of the Constitution of Jamaica that a proclamation made by the Governor General for the purposes of, with that section, shall, unless previously revoked, remain in force for 14 days or for such longer period not exceeding 3 months as both Houses of Parliament may determine by a resolution supported by a 2/3 majority of members of each House. And whereas under the provisions of Section 3, subsection 1 of the Emergency Powers Act, it is lawful for the Governor General during a state of public emergency, by order, to make regulations for securing the essentials of life to the community. And whereas the Governor of the powers conferred upon him by Section 3.1 of the Emergency Powers Act made the Emergency Powers Regulations 2019 for securing the essentials of life to the entire area comprising the parishes of St. James, Hanover, and during the state of public emergency. And whereas Section 3, subsection 4 of the Emergency Powers Act provides that any regulations so made shall be laid before the Senate and House of Representatives as soon as may be after they are made, and shall not continue in force after the expiration of 7 days from the time they are so laid before the Senate and the House of Representatives, whichever shall be, unless a resolution is passed by the Senate and House of Representatives providing for the continuance thereof. And whereas the Emergency Powers Regulations 2019 were laid in the Senate on the 3rd day of May 2019, the House of Representatives on the 7th day of May 2019. And whereas it is desirable that A, the state of public emergency declared as aforementioned remain and continue in force for a further period of 3 months until the 29th day of July 2019, and B, the Emergency Powers Regulations 2019 continue in force until the expiration of the emergency. Now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Emergency Powers Continuance Resolution 2019. 2. The state of public emergency general by proclamation on the 30th day of April 2019 shall remain in force for a further period of 3 months until the 29th day of July 2019. And 3. The Emergency Powers Regulations 2019 are hereby continued in force until the 29th day of July 2019. And Mr. President, I beg to give further notice that at a later stage today, of standing orders to allow me to take this motion.
Thank you, Minister. Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now move for suspension of the standing order, the motion notice of which I gave earlier.
You have heard the question. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Jamaica has, for far too long, experienced an extraordinarily high level of violent crime. It has, for too long, been a feature of our society, has impacted on our communities, on our children for far too long. For too long, Mr. President, too many lives have been lost. The level of violence and the cycle of fear and trauma that it produces has placed some communities in a state of crisis. Responding to this crisis, on Tuesday, the 30th of April 2019, the government state of public emergency for the geographical area consisting of the entire parishes of St. James, Westmoreland, and Hanover. The state of public emergency applies collectively to the three parishes, each of which represents a police division, but collectively forms one contiguous area of operations. The proclamation was made, Mr. President, on the advice of the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Defense Staff, who was high level of violent criminal activity experienced, continuing and threatening in the specified area, is of such a nature and on so extensive a scale that it endangers public safety. Mr. President, we have been noting with concern the recent crime trends in Western Jamaica, particularly following the discontinuation of the state of public emergency in January 2019. The security forces had requested that it be extended. They had indicated that given the scope and nature of the circumstances, that it was too early to be lifted, that more time was needed. The criminals have, since then, been hell-bent on reasserting their destructive influence in vulnerable communities and space. Again, the criminal elements have taken the opportunity to display their disregard and ruthlessness, Mr. President, but primarily their disregard for our fundamental right, the right to life. The Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, in seeking the Parliament for the extension which we too seek in this chamber, Mr. President, shared that he has heard directly the calls of citizens in Western Jamaica, whose lives, whose families, whose property, and whose general livelihood has been threatened and stifled by merciless criminals. He shared that citizens had described their reality as being in a state of perpetual paranoia, He spoke of vendors being pressured into closing shops early out of fear that they might wrong time, residents being forced to go home early out of fear that they may get caught in crossfire. The citizens of Western Jamaica have broadly endorsed the granting of additional powers to the security forces to save their lives. And this, we believe, Mr. President, must likewise compel us to endorse this extension. Mr. President, been lost and many more lives will be lost if we fail to take decisive and strong action now to deal with the extensive threat to public safety which currently exists. Criminals have no respect for age, for gender, for status in life. The data from the three parishes reflect this. Mr. President, over the period January 1 to 28th of April 2019, the parish of St. James produced the highest number of all police divisions, 51 murders in those 4 months. This figure represents a 70% increase when compared to murders in 2018 over the equivalent period. Sad to think of all the gains lost. Mr. President, likewise, At the time of the declaration, Westmoreland, with 43 murders, reflected the second highest number of murders over the same period, together with, came in a tie with St. Andrew South. St. James and Westmoreland, being neighboring parishes, compounds the concern, considering that combined and contiguous space has accounted for 22% of the murders in the country, 22% of the total murders in the country since the start of the year. When combined with the third adjoining parish of Hanover, they account, Mr. President, together for more than a quarter of the murders committed since the start of the year. Mr. President, pardon me, if we use the globally recognized measure of homicides in relation to the population, so homicides per 100,000, these three parishes would already be off the charts on both an individual and collective basis year to date. As at the 28th of April 2019, Westmoreland, St. James, and Hanover were ranked as the first, second, and fourth in Jamaica, with 29, 26, and 18 murders, respectively, per 100,000 inhabitants. The current rates, if maintained, would realize at this rate year-end figures of 88, 79, and 55 murders per 100,000 inhabitants, respectively. 88, 78, and 55, 79, and 55 murders per 100,000 inhabitants, respectively, representing inordinately high figures comparatively to national, global, or even regional averages. The global average, Mr. President, on crime, the global average of murders per 100,000 is 6, Mr. President. So I want you to think about that global average as compared to what is occurring in our parishes, Mr. President, and say why it is we feel this is an emergency. Mr. President, the figures that we're looking at in these parishes are almost double or triple and are projected to be multiples of the global average. To us, the figures undoubtedly are clear that public safety is threatened and the circumstances are not normal. Mr. President, in 2017, St. James had the highest number of murders in relation to population, with 183 murders per 100,000, while Westmoreland and Hanover were ranked as the second and third most violent parishes with 186 per 100,000, respectively. Mr. President, in 2018, Westmoreland recorded the highest number of murders in relation to population with 97 per 100,000, while Hanover and St. James were ranked as the second and fourth most violent parishes per 100,000 persons, respectively. The projections of the security forces are therefore clearly not speculative. The numbers speak for themselves. This is the direction in which the murders will go if the emergency which they present is not treated appropriately. Mr. President, the declared space has also featured prominently in gun violence on a whole since the start of 2019. 72 firearms were recovered over the period, which represents 30% of the total number of firearms recovered across the island. These circumstances in the declared area, Mr. President, are undoubtedly so extensive a scale as to threaten public safety. Mr. President, the data shows that approximately 56 active gangs are present in the declared area, operating in a space where rivalries, reprisals, and counter-reprisals continue a murderous cycle that puts people's lives at risk every day. To contextualize this figure at the top, of the priority list. But, Mr. President, these numbers, to put them in context, are out of 250 gangs on the island. So you can see the heavy concentration in these three parishes. Mr. President, when 7 people are shot in one yard, 6 killed on the spot, and it's not an isolated like you would see on cable with some angry person who is some inner turmoil on society. These are part of planned clinical, strategic recruitment, protection, and retention strategies that are being employed by organized gangs in the space. Year-olds, to sell them a story of manhood that will fill in any gap that fear didn't quite close out in their minds when they're trying to figure out the path that pressure in the community. Mr. President, the seriousness and urgency of our situation, and the situation in the declared area in particular, requires action on. We therefore want to urge support for the extension that is being sought today, and in so doing, to urge support for our security forces. For Jamaicans. Mr. President, the administration is doing all that it can and all that it must to preserve lives at risk from violence and to bring safety and security to every community outside of the states of emergency area across the island. The state of emergency is not the plan, it is not the strategy, but it is required to assist where required on the assessment of the security forces so that the area can be returned to a state in which regular policing, routine policing can be. I want to remind Mr. President that we rely on the advice of the security forces in this regard. We rely on their strategic assessment, their operational analyses, and they give the guidance, Mr. President. We take our governmental responsibility regarding citizen security seriously. I therefore want to encourage all the members of this House, of this chamber, to look beyond the aisle that separates us. It is where they are way beyond any debate because they literally have a sense of public safety. They don't have it. It's beyond some. They do not have it, Mr. President.
Senator Brown, allow the minister just, rather than just, I'll allow her to finish, please. And when, what? I'm going to allow her to finish. It is the minister's right. It is the minister's right to speak and to be heard without interruption. And I'm going to require that each member respects the other's right to present and to be heard, including your Senator Brown. So the minister needs to, I don't want to be giving anybody any.
You are the one interrupting her, because I've stopped talking long ago.
No. Please, President, we had a standing orders meeting this morning, and I refer you to standing order clause 43. Not in this Senate.
Senator Brown, just allow the minister to complete. And I will interrupt. No, but you're shouting across the aisle and you're interrupting the minister. Please, Minister.
So I am asking that all members look beyond the aisle to the communities where these heinous crimes are being committed, Mr. President. Side, pursuant to the advice of the security forces, which have recommended an extension 14 days now subsisting in relation to the state of public emergency, the Emergency Powers Continuance Resolution 2019 is being put before this chamber with a view to having its extension area comprising the parishes of St. James, Westmoreland, and Hanover in their entirety to remain in force for a further 3 months until the 29th of July, following the expiration of their current. Mr. President, we believe that the facts speak for themselves, that it is clear from the numbers and from the ground that the prevalence of violent crime and greatly and immediately threatens public order and public safety in the declared area, while fueling extraordinary levels of fear and insecurity in the declared area. Mr. President, it's unacceptable that it would be allowed to continue. It is not normal, Mr. President. It is not routine. The use of the state of emergency and its extension is also not normal, nor is it routine. It is extraordinary, and we recognize it as such. Mr. President, is where we no longer see these numbers as extraordinary. It is our responsibility to rein in the criminal, Mr. President. To return our Jamaica, to return our society, impeded by an everyday sense of a threat to life and person, a threat to order, a threat to public safety on a daily basis, Mr. President. We in the Senate are being called on to play our part in returning communities into spaces where people are not wiped out in one yard in one fell swoop, where children and hard-working men and women do not stand at a bus stop in fear that they will be victims of crossfire or traumatized by the sound, where they're then expected to be productive and focused at school or at work, and to raise balanced families. Mr. President, we need to return. Dons don't feel that they can capture girls from their families with impunity, where mothers have nowhere to turn because everyone is in fear and no one will talk. Where an 11-year-old will be on her way home from church without fear of being raped. That is not normal, Mr. President. This is not in anywhere in the world be considered as normal. And Mr. President, it is our responsibility to play our part. That persons could be so desensitized that they believe that these numbers, because you might have had a percentage drop here, some success there, stasis in another place, that somehow this equates with the fact that this is not an emergency. The global average, I repeat, Mr. President, of intentional homicides on how they are classified globally is 6 per 100,000. In the parishes in which we are speaking of, we are already double and triple that. The Senate has a crucial role to play. Yes. We believe the threshold by the Constitution has been met. Literally, lives depend on the decisions we take today. I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Knight.
Thank you, President. I listened to the leader of government business as this resolution, and uninterrupted as she was, and to respond. But just before I speak to this, the leader of opposition business spoke on my behalf in welcoming Senator Morgan. Senator, I must tell you, that walking through the door to enter, when I heard the government business say that you had attended an institution that ought to be a university, when she said it, I didn't hear the institution you referred to. So as I walked in, there's a feeling of happiness as I said, here is another old Mary. But I do welcome you. And I look to hearing you make your presentations, and I hope that we can work together to achieve that goal which you stated as being yours, the betterment of our society. First President, that there's a sort of discomfiture that I feel this morning. I have heard this refrain before, and I look at the Emerging Powers Continuance Resolution 2019, and I read these words again. A state of public emergency exists. Has been taken or is immediately threatened by any person or body or persons of such a nature and on so extensive a scale as to be likely to end the public safety. So in other words, what I conclude from that is that when this was first brought to the Senate, the public emergency was established on the premise that I just read. And it was established in one of the parishes at least that is now included in this order. So what has changed? What has changed since we first agreed to the declaration of a state of emergency in St. James? The problem continues. So something is wrong. Then I look at it and I say, oh, apparently the government is using the global average in making its determination. And I say, if the global average is being used, why only those 3 parishes? Why? Is the global average that which aspire to achieving? If that is so, and it ought to be so, then what is it that is going to take us there? What we have been doing is we have been using this declaration in a bandit manner. And, you know, Band-Aid can be good. But if I use a Band-Aid and the infection continues, then I know that the Band-Aid isn't the cure. So something underlying remains. We have to get to that underlying cause. And so I ask myself, is this dealing with underlying cause, or is this a band-aid? Sure, I'm going to be told, well, look here, if the band-aid prevents some infection, then it's relief. But what happens is, if you don't treat the underlying cause, then you're going to have to use several band-aids. And what we're doing is we're changing band-aids every 3 months. So adding up. Something is not adding up. Because if we continue with this, then there is no cure. No cure that is being applied. It bothers me. That's why I have this morning. Had this effective, then we would not have to be using it again. You don't like that? Well, I am not here to please you. Because you have presented in here arguments that I don't like, but I listen. The
President is about to intervene and said you must speak uninterrupted.
Why is it that this becomes necessary again? It must mean that whatever was done didn't about any sustainable change. And I hear it was interrupted. That is an inane argument. It is inane because what this really contemplates is a short. It was in place for a year.
1 year.
A year. A year. 1 year. Chairman, let them talk. Let them talk. I don't mind. The more they talk, is the more a certain emptiness is revealed.
Mr. President, I'm sure you're not hearing them interrupted tonight.
And as they make all, it reminds me of barriers. Yes. And as they continue to speak, even when they should not, see that there's a leading barrel. There's a leading barrel.
The member has the right, as I pointed out earlier, to make his presentation. That is a right to make your presentation unhindered, shouting across the aisle. So would you please continue? And Senator Morrison, control yourself, please. Yes.
An empty barrel that keeps on making most noise. And so I want to ignore distraction. Perhaps allow President wants to fulminate to do so. And then I will write, I'll sit again. This matter is a serious thing.
They don't understand.
We have been asked, but we listen through this.
They don't want that.
You can't just be a sycophant because you're not helping. You're not helping.
They come to rubber stamp.
I was told in here once, oh, you're going to pay a big political price for not supporting this. Political prices don't bother me. Don't bother me. What I am dealing with is this the sensible way to go? Right. Is it? You emergency powers, is there a light at the end of this tunnel? The answer seems to be no, because it was used for a year.
They have no solution.
So the moment you remove the band-aid, starts again.
That shows.
So that means the curative effect that you thought it had, it didn't. It didn't. What I was told in the Senate was that, oh, it was a temporary measure and that things would be put in place to sustain gains that had been had. Well, what was it that was put in place?
No.
What?
They remove the police, huh?
To dismantle mobile reserve?
No, man, cover.
Only because the man cover.
Different argument. Cover that.
President, this senator, is prepared to pay a political price. I'm prepared. Why isn't there a declaration in Clarendon? Why isn't there a declaration in St. Catherine? Isn't there a declaration in other parishes where the is high and far above the global average? The approach being used is fundamentally flawed. I have a difficulty too, in the sense that when I look at this, I join with other legal scholars who have said that this is unconstitutional. That if challenged, a court would find that this is not in keeping with our constitutional requirement. But the government is unmoved. Unmoved.
They don't listen to anybody.
I listened to a part of the presentation in the lower chamber. And what I heard, recitation of what was. I heard a recitation of what is. And I heard of what will be. All I can hear is, if you don't vote for this, if you don't support it, then you're supporting criminals.
Nonsense.
That is the greatest stupidity I've ever heard.
That's surprising from them, though.
It is so nonsensical that I hope those sentiments are again. Some of us gave years of their lives trying to deal with this problem. Some of the policies that some of us put in place years ago are still in place now, still being used now. So to hear that if you don't support it, is because you're supporting criminals. Insultive position. An insultive position. Well, I want to make my position clear. If I don't support this, and you'll soon know, nothing to do with any nonsense about supporting criminals. What I'm looking for is a plan. How these other countries got to this average of 6 per 100,000? What did they use? What was the method? What was used in Minneapolis when it was regarded as the murder capital of the world? They used to call it Murderopolis. What was used? And from this, what is that? I have spoken. I have spoken ad nauseam in this chamber about the need to get community involvement. I asked about neighborhood watch. I asked about the community consultative committees. Heard all kinds of things. About a few weeks ago, I saw a full page ad in the newspaper telling communities how to start a neighborhood watch. What took so long? No, don't give me credit for it. I don't. No. It was started by Mr. Neville Wheatle, who was then a superintendent of. Started in November 1980, when it was launched in near Waltham Park, there, Mall Road. What I can say is I was the only politician who went to the launch. The minister didn't. No, he didn't. What is it that you're asking people to buy into? To help, because it cannot simply be a policing solution. That's integral. I heard certain criminologists saying, oh, you don't have. Where's the plan? Because criminologists are the ones usually used in helping to prepare such a plan. Goes on its merry way, threatening parliamentarians who don't support it. And yet, you're not here often enough to know. and yet, you know, anyway, let me go on. Listen, I'm going to ask one last time. Prime Minister, plan in place. There was no plan. You may have policy desires and policy statements, but policy statement can't substitute for a plan. How are you if you take a rational approach? You don't, when I am interrupted, they can't deal with. From the year-long state of emergency. Why? The government says, well, it's temporary. Same result. Because you say it has to be that which does not show action. The society. So that I read where you have vendors there say they don't support it. Barabbas. Of trying to vilify those. If the 14th vote you need.
Freud was incorrectly.
Just for correction, I didn't describe it.
We welcome you on board. We know you're at your. It was actually blue and gold. The only difference is. We have had a lot of debates in this part that our brothers and sisters are being